The night Pavel Durov arrived in Paris, the city was smothered in a thick, unnatural fog that clung to the streets like a disease. The air was suffocating, laced with the acrid stench of decay, and the rain that fell wasn't cleansing but foul, as if the very sky was rotting. As his plane touched down, Pavel felt an oppressive weight settle over him, a premonition of the horrors that awaited. It began with a message that dripped with malice, arriving on his encrypted phone just after midnight: Operation Starfish. Be careful what you dig into. The words seemed to pulse with a life of their own, a silent scream from the abyss. Pavel's hands shook as he read them, a deep, primal fear gnawing at the edges of his mind. This wasn't just a warning, it was a threat from something far darker than he had ever encountered. Driven by a need to understand, Pavel locked himself in his hotel room and plunged into the digital depths, tearing through firewalls and government servers like a man possessed. What he uncovered made his blood run cold. Operation Starfish wasn't merely a conspiracy, it was a grotesque, malevolent force that had wormed its way into the heart of the world's most powerful governments. It was a genocide wrapped in the false promise of salvation. Under the guise of humanitarian aid, the French government, guided by a shadowy cabal of elites, had unleashed a series of sterilization programs aimed at the world's most vulnerable. The documents Pavel uncovered detailed how these chemicals were designed to rot the reproductive organs from the inside out, turning wombs into barren wastelands and leaving entire generations cursed to extinction. The victims, innocent men, women, and children, were little more than cattle, butchered on the altar of a twisted ideology that worshipped death. The evidence was monstrous. Videos of smiling doctors injecting unsuspecting mothers with a vaccine that seared their insides, footage of children screaming in agony as their bodies betrayed them, and the cold, dead eyes of the bureaucrats who signed off on these atrocities. Indifferent to the suffering they caused, Pavel could barely stomach it, but he knew he had to act. The world had to know. As he prepared to unleash the damning evidence onto Telegram, the darkness in his room seemed to thicken, as if the walls themselves were closing in. He could feel something watching him, something ancient and hungry. Just as he was about to hit send, the lights flickered, and the door to his room exploded inward, splinters of wood spraying across the room like shrapnel. The shadows seemed to move with a mind of their own, coalescing into the figures of heavily armed men, their faces hidden behind masks that bore the twisted, grinning visages of skulls. They moved like phantoms, their footsteps silent on the plush carpet. Before Pavel could react, they were on him, their gloved hands cold as they pinned him to the ground. He could smell the metallic tang of blood on their breath, feel the chill of death radiating from them. These weren't just men. They were something far worse, the very embodiment of the void, sent to drag him into the depths. As they hauled him to his feet, Pavel managed to activate the dead man's switch, a final act of defiance. If he didn't log in within 48 hours, everything he had uncovered would be unleashed, a torrent of horror that would burn through the web like wildfire. But even as he said it, he knew it might not be enough. These creatures weren't just after him, they wanted to erase every trace of his existence. They took him to a place that should not have existed, a sprawling, underground labyrinth beneath the Parisian catacombs, where the bones of the forgotten lined the walls, their hollow eye sockets watching as he was dragged through the corridors. The air was thick with the scent of mold and death, the walls dripping with something that wasn't quite water. It felt as if the very ground beneath him was alive, pulsing with a dark energy that sapped the strength from his limbs. They threw him into a cell that reeked of despair, the walls slick with a black, tar-like substance that seemed to writhe and squirm in the dim light. The ceiling was low, pressing down on him like the weight of 1,000 graves. Pavel could hear them in the darkness, the soft, wet sounds of something moving just beyond his vision, something that whispered to him in a language he couldn't understand but instinctively feared. The interrogations began almost immediately, though they were unlike any torture Pavel had ever imagined. They didn't use knives or fists. Instead, they brought the darkness itself into the cell, letting it seep into his mind, warping his thoughts, twisting his memories until he couldn't tell what was real and what was nightmare. He could hear the screams of the dead, their voices echoing through the walls, mingling with the sounds of flesh tearing and bones snapping. They showed him visions of the future they were creating, a world where the sky was blackened with ash, and the earth was a barren, lifeless wasteland, populated only by the damned. As the hours bled into days, Pavel felt himself slipping away, his mind fraying under the relentless assault. The walls of his cell seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in time with his own labored breaths. The tar-like substance began to crawl up his legs, cold and slimy, and when he looked down, he swore he saw faces in it, twisted, tortured faces, their mouths open in silent screams. Then, as the 48-hour deadline approached, he received a message that shattered the last remnants of his hope. They know about the switch. It's only a matter of time. He stared at the words, his vision blurring as the reality of his situation crashed down on him. They had found it, the one thing that could have saved him, the one thing that could have saved the world. The door to his cell creaked open, and the darkness seemed to surge forward, eager to claim him. The figures stepped into the room, their eyes gleaming with a malevolent light, their smiles stretched too wide, revealing teeth that were far too sharp. They had come to finish what they had started, to drag him into the void and erase him from existence. As they closed in, Pavel could feel the cold tendrils of the darkness wrapping around his limbs, pulling him down into the black, icy depths. But even as he was consumed, he clung to one last, desperate hope. The files were out there, buried deep in the darkest corners of the web. Maybe, just maybe, someone would find them. Maybe the truth would still find a way to the surface, clawing its way up from the abyss, to expose the horror that was Operation Starfish. But as the darkness swallowed him whole, Pavel knew that he would never see that day. His screams were lost in the void, drowned out by the echo of Athos and others who had come before him. And as the last flicker of light was snuffed out, the only certainty was that the darkness would continue to spread, devouring everything in its path, until the world itself was nothing more than a hollow, rotting shell. Operation Starfish would go on, its victims forgotten, erased from history as if they had never existed. And the world would remain blissfully ignorant, blind to the terror lurking in the shadows, until it was too late.
There is nothing we can't make scary.